20 years after Star Trek Deep Space Nine's series finale, a documentary on the show is set to hit theaters later this month. It features the show's original writers who have a vision for what a future season of the show could look like. CBS got our hands on a clip from the doc. Here's a sneak peek.
I'd like to begin on the Defiant with Nog, who's in Starfleet.
Captain Nog by now,
who could be a
probably.
captain, and they are getting their asses kicked. We start on action. It's evasive maneuvers. It's don't fire back.
He's trying to escape, and we don't realize. We're wondering, why was he attacked? What has he got?
He was attacked by a cloaked ship.
By a cloaked ship. So he's on the run. Someone's shooting at him. Maybe he's running for the wormhole. When he makes it through the wormhole, that's his escape. But on the other side of the wormhole, the ship is out of power and drifting. He looks out the window and he's like, oh, thank God. Pan up from the ship. Dun, 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 dun. Well, that's the end of the tease, isn't it?
Pretty cool. The documentary is called What We Left Behind, looking back at Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It comes out on May 13th. And joining us to talk about the new film is director Ira Steven Behr. He was also a showrunner on Deep Space Nine and Nana Visitor. She played Major Kira Nerys on the show. Thank you both for being with us. This is so cool.
Pleasure.
Good to be here.
So, Ira, more than a quarter century after it first debuted, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, as you know, is extremely popular, sort of a cult following right now. But explain why it was controversial at one point.
Well, I think the biggest thing was we weren't on a starship. The show took place on a space station. And to Star Trek fans, the series is all about boldly going, and we kind of boldly stayed right where we were. So from the start, it was a little difficult for the fans to accept.
But it was bold, and you know what I think ultimately happened is people grew to love it because it wasn't as tied to canon as sometimes the other spin-offs are.
Well, I think the major kind of thing we did for the series that was different was we were really character-based. We were about the people. We were not as big on doing space anomalies and you know, heavy tech shows. It was really about the people, and I think that came through. It was a character-driven show.
And one of those characters, Major Nerys, Nana, how does it feel after all of these years to see people resonating with the show, and specifically characters like yours?
It's deeply satisfying. And to have 15-year-olds come up to me and go, Major Kira, it's, you know, these are families watching with families, and it goes on, and it's generational. We were serialized. That was another big thing that you did that at the time was very difficult for people. If they missed one show, what had happened, how could they catch up? Now, when you can just binge watch, it's made for these times where you binge watch shows. And that's where the 15-year-olds are getting huge satisfaction. And people who saw it the first time are watching it again and getting a whole new take on it because you can see it the way it's meant to be watched.
So, Nana, your character had a really interesting timeline in the series because you started out as sort of like a terrorist guerrilla fighter, and ultimately you were promoted to colonel on the space station.
Yes, I had an amazing arc. I go from someone who really has post-traumatic stress to someone who is grounded in herself, her culture, and the culture around her as well. So she went from tough, which is really all about fear, to a real strength. And that, you know, there weren't that many women getting roles like that at the time. Now, of course, thank goodness there are a lot of them.
For sure, and that was going to be my next question to you, Ira. one of the things that this show is known for, it took a lot of risk. It covered issues like war, religion, homelessness, but there was one area, and a lot of shows do that now. I mean, that is, I guess, the point that in the 1990s it was sort of seen as unique and controversial, and now it's commonplace. But there was one specific area you thought the show could have done better. What was that?
Well, I think one of the places where I think we probably fell down a little bit was in sexual identity and the portrayal of what's now known as gays in space. I'm not sure that we would have been allowed to do it if we had tried, to be honest. Can't say. That would have been a fight. But the fact that we really didn't try, I mean, we had characters on the show, one of them, Garrick, who I think was clearly, his sexual orientation was pretty clear, but we didn't go there. And, I could pass it off as a sign of the times, but, I wish we had been as bold going there as we were bold going in other places.
And now, of course, in the new CBS All Access show, which is the prequel to Star Trek, Wilson Cruz and Anthony Rapp play two men who have a loving and committed relationship. So that arc is finally, or that loop has finally been closed when it comes to at least Star Trek and a lot of other shows as well. But you felt back then that it might have been a step too far. Or at least maybe the producers or whoever was, maybe the network felt that it might be too much.
One of the things that went on a lot was every change we made, every place we tried to go that no Trek series had gone before was a fight. There was a lot of, you had to really push, and pushing gets to be a little tiresome after a while. You're also doing the show at the same time.
But Ira, you did have Dax. You didn't avoid it completely.
No, we didn't avoid it completely, and we did one show, Rejoin, which was a really, really powerful show that showed two women or trying to have a committed relationship. And that was good, and that was great. But like I say in the docs, one episode in 7 years, you can pat yourself on the back only so much. I'm glad that we did it, but we were fighting, or we were arguing, or we were discussing on a lot of different areas to move the show forward in a way that I thought was natural. I mean, Michael Piller and Rick Berman created the show. I didn't create the show. They just gave us a playing field that I thought was unique in Star Trek, and I thought my goal was to take what they gave us and take it as far as we could. And, I was surprised that we hit so much pushback.
Yeah, for sure. Before I let you guys go, Nana, what would be the one thing that you would want people to know about your time on the show and how you feel it fits into not just the Star Trek canon, but the arc of television, popular television series in general?
Well, first of all, I was just saying to Ira that our 7 years, we spent so many hours, I once spent a 22-hour day at work, that I know these people like, it's kind of like dog years. It's like not 7 years, it's 30 years. It's an enormous amount of my life and time and living and loving wrapped up in the show. And I think, to answer the other part of your question, that we're all standing on the shoulders of the things that came before. But I think that Deep Space Nine really did move the dial in what people can expect of humanity. And I have so many people who come up to me and say it meant something from the very first time I went out on conventions, and someone from the Holocaust showed me their tattoo.
Wow.
And said that meant something to me, to today soldiers and Marines who come up and say, I have post-traumatic stress. It helped me. I watch the show all the time. I got something out of, or kids who say, I found a way to be strong even though I was different. That's deeply satisfying.
I can imagine, and certainly it just sort of does fit into the legacy of what Star Trek has always been, that vision that Gene Roddenberry had for this universe, this world that he created. And I'm so glad that you were able to personify that. Nana visitor, Ira Stephen Behr, thank you so much. Can't wait for the doc.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Enjoy it.
And if you want to check out what we left behind, looking back at Star Trek Deep Space Nine, you can see it in a select movie theater on May 13th only.